Most people who view this program have likely been to some form of schooling and education. And during our education, we are usually given at some point, regardless of the grade, regardless of the level of education, a project to pursue and complete and to be graded on. NATO has Project Ukraine, an experiment in attempting to provoke Russia into a broader war, which will eventually lead to Russia's downfall. This was mainly, believe it or not, concocted and was supposed to be an economic rather than a military project, meaning that the military means and ends were supposed to serve an economic collapse, which would then lead to regime change in Moscow. Of course, this has failed dramatically, with sanctions actually bolstering Russia's self reliance, leading to sustained economic growth. But NATO has continued on its military side of this project too, only to find itself in a completely and utterly disastrous situation where Russia has taken command on the battlefield. It is only a matter of time now. Now, with this, there have been some pretty stark examples of Russia's success. We could look at the battlefield. We can look at Chasiv Yar and other villages and cities which are falling to Russia nearly by the day, leading to some to believe that 2025 will be the year, or at least leading into 2025 will be the year where this conflict could very well be settled, regardless of its attritional character. But this is also just an example of how absolutely, right, absolutely disastrous this project has become. Because much of this project was laid on the foundation that NATO and the United States have superior weaponry, which, when given to Ukraine, would lead to Russia's military, if not downfall, it would lead to such a quagmire that it would be bad for Russia. Remember, the United States and NATO have tried this before, 1979, in Afghanistan, to pull and draw Russia into a kinetic conflict, which would then, whether it's by proxy or direct, which would then lead to a completely destabilizing situation for the Russian government, at that time the Soviet government. So here we have Russia flaunting Western military hardware captured in Ukraine. Sounds like Russia is doing quite okay, but the cope in the seethe is huge here. So this BBC so-called journalist Steve Rosenberg, the so-called Russia editor, says, I'm in Victory Park in Moscow, a giant memorial complex dedicated to the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany. A new open-air exhibition has just opened. It has nothing to do with World War II, however. On display is Western military hardware captured by the Russian army in Ukraine. They are war trophies, and Russia decided to flaunt them. Among the armor here is British Army Husky tactical support vehicle, which had been donated to Ukraine. Its windscreen is covered in bullet holes. Opposite the Husky, I can see Western tanks that have been transferred to the Ukrainian military. There's an American Abrams, which had been damaged on the battlefield, a German Leopard tank too. In fact, there's a long line of German armor, and above it a sign, history is repeating itself. I mean, imagine the humiliation here. This is humiliating to the collective West. This is NATO completely being exposed by Russia's military superiority. And this is a genius political move because Russia has won over the global majority, and many people in the global majority in the global South and the countries oppressed and super exploited by the American empire and NATO believe that Russia's existential fight with Ukraine and NATO is in fact history repeating itself, leading to a potential World War scenario. So Russian authorities want the public to think the war in Ukraine and World War II have a common denominator. Russia is the victim, under attack from enemies abroad. In reality, these are two different wars. In 1941, Germany invaded Russia. In 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So this is supposed to be the basic logic that's supposed to own and expose Russia's duplicity and lies. But in fact, all they are doing is exposing themselves, because to believe that Russia just invaded out of the blue in 2022 without precipitants that could be seen as akin to invading Russia, what Ukraine was doing with NATO weaponry, what NATO was doing to bring its forces to the border, what NATO had planned for Ukraine. All of those were precipitants, which could very well be seen as having as its objective the invasion of Russia. So really silly Russia to believe it should preemptively defend its sovereignty when all the writing is on the wall that the overall aim of the American empire, of the neocons, of its NATO vassals is to, in fact, destroy and destabilize Russia. But it's packed out, the War Trophy exhibition was. In bright sunshine, Russians are crowding around the military hardware, posing for photographs in front of tank gun barrels, and from the sounds of it, thoroughly enjoying the display. It's incredible, jaw-dropping, said Natalia, who's here with her husband and small daughter. It's amazing to think our guys managed to get these trophies. More than 30 armored vehicles have been put on display. Look at that crowd. This is the BBC owning itself, essentially. This is the BBC showing Russia's military superiority. This is absolutely astounding in my estimation. The cope here and the seethe here is so astonishing. He is witnessing, this so-called journo in BBC is witnessing Russia's absolute superiority and the Russian people's support for Russia's Ukraine response. But why? Why are they huddling here? Russians have not invented the wheel here. In the past, Ukraine has displayed Russian military hardware that has been captured by Ukraine's army. But the Russian authorities, this exhibition has, I believe, several key objectives. The first is to reinforce the Kremlin's narrative that Ukraine, NATO, and the West as a whole are waging war on Russia. The aim here is to demonize the West yet further in the minds of Russians. In reality, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine, something Western leaders had urged Moscow not to do. It was President Putin's personal decision to launch what Russia refers to as a special military operation in Ukraine. So this is just cope and seethe here. First of all, it is quite clear that the United States has been plotting and planning a war on Russia for many, many, many years, going back to the Wolfowitz Doctrine, and even just going back in recent years before the special military operation. Seymour Hersh's, for example, revelations on Nord Stream talk about 2021, the United States, Germany, U.S. intelligence planning Nord Stream as a way not just to keep Germany down, but to also provoke Russia and destroy its economy. You can just look at what NATO has done to militarily encircle. We don't have to go on and on and on about it, but the military encirclement of Russia, the sanctions which predate the special military operation, the concerted attempts to try to support the so-called opposition. You remember Navalny. All of these things Russia defeated. Russia was well on the way and prepared for, but nonetheless, they all speak to war aims against Russia that the Western mainstream media wants you to forget. Then there's a historical symbolism. Right now, Victoria Park is ablaze with red flags commemorating the upcoming Victory Day, May 9th national holiday, which marks Hitler's defeat. The venue for this exhibition and the timing feed that other official narrative I mentioned earlier, the one claiming a link between World War II and Ukraine. But there's a large element of gloating about this exhibition. Regarding the war in Ukraine, the Russians appear increasingly confident despite $61 billion package of U.S. assistance to Kiev. Moscow believes it now is the initiative on the battlefield. Russia's main message is written on a big sign beside the war trophy. It reads, "Our victory is inevitable." Imagine publishing this article. Actually, this is astounding to me. To publish this article and try to paint it as some kind of effective response. Actually, all this article really did, right, was show Russia actually does have the initiative. Russia is very confident right now that Russia doesn't really have anything to worry about. And we can just keep going on and on here. I'm just going to show you more of these photos, okay? So here is Russia opening the exhibition. I'm just going to show you how Sputnik showed it. So here we go. I'm going to turn on the mute because there's nothing really to see. But this is what they're showing. They're showing the Abrams. They're showing the Leopards. They're showing all of these Western vehicles. Okay. And then we can go on. Here you go. There is, I believe that's the Abrams, correct? I can't read Russian, but I believe this is an Abrams tank. It has that American flag on it. Here, I believe this was probably a leopard, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a military expert, but it's got that German flag on it. And then here you have some British. I wonder if these are Challengers or whatnot. But here is the British and NATO flag on this one. So there you have it. You have the gloating that the BBC was talking about. Now, I want to get into the story of Dmitry Kuleba, the so-called foreign minister in Ukraine. I use so-called because I don't believe Ukraine is a sovereign country. But here you have a question and answer how Kiev plans to use American aid. And you will see the cope and the sieve here as well when it comes to the foreign minister. And he goes after the United States quite starkly. So it says Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba joins Foreign Policy Live. So I'm not going to play the video, but we're going to here is Ravi Agrawal of Foreign Policy Magazine talking about the aid. And he said that the aid, what is the impact going to be? It's going to be a boost. If the package that was announced immediately after the adoption of law had contained a battery of Patriots, this boost would have been even stronger among the people because Ukrainians suffer most from missile attacks by Russia. So, talking about the ballistic attacks by Russia, they've been mainly used to destroy our energy system. I will dare to say, and this is the cope and the seed, that Russia has been very effective at hitting Kiev's energy lines because it has a lot to do with its military capabilities. Does it change the military strategy for Ukraine, the aid package? So there's a time gap between the announcement of the aid package and the moment when a Ukrainian artilleryman has more shells to fire back at Russian invaders. That moment has not come yet because everything that was announced, we are grateful and we appreciate it, still on its way. And therefore, in this time gap, bad things may happen, such as the advance of Russian forces on the ground, admitting that there is a big time gap here. When is this weaponry actually going to be effectively used? The artillery ratio on the ground is incomprehensible. Basically, Ukrainian soldiers are starving because of lack of artillery ammunition. In the end, they get bombed and their positions get destroyed. So, we're going to get to the part where he starts coming after the United States. So what really matters in terms of the war is not only the quantity and quality of what is being provided, but the timeline. And unfortunately, I have to admit that Ukraine's allies are behind schedule despite their efforts. Some of them are making great effort. But when I look at what Russia has achieved in restoring production of its defenders' industrial base and what the entire West has achieved so far, we have to face the truth and recognize that Russia is more effective in the war effort. And this raises more fundamental questions to the West. If it cannot be efficient enough in this particular war effort, then how efficient can it be if other wars and crises of the same scale break out? So there you have Kuleba just absolutely coping, seething, talking about how this conflict, I mean, really what he's saying is that this conflict is essentially lost. The timing of this aid is not working out, and there is going to be just absolutely hell to pay from here on out. But I want to go now to what he says about the United States, okay? And what he says about the United States is very, very concerning, okay? And it should concern the United States. Here we go. This is where he talks about. So the question here is about Republicans, is about what J.D. Vance wrote. It's Ukraine's challenge, not the GOP. It's the math. He says you need more soldiers than you can ever field and more weapons than America can ever provide. He also cites you specifically, saying you keep asking for more Patriot interceptors, but you need thousands while America only makes 550 a year. How do you respond? So basically asking, what are the points that you have to make in response to political opposition in the United States to ongoing efforts to fund and arm Ukraine? And this is a stark thing that Foreign Policy Magazine is admitting, that there is a need for thousands of Patriot interceptors, but the United States only produces 550 a year. This is true of most of the weaponry that Ukraine needs. So what does Kuleba say? Let's see the silver lining here. When I look at the votes cast by members of the Republican Party in both houses of Congress, I don't get an impression that the opinion you mentioned represents a majority. If the war is only about math, you and I wouldn't be talking today because the position of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine would not exist anymore. We'd have lost the war already. Look at the map and at the size of the country that invaded Ukraine. Then look at the size of Ukraine, but pure mathematical calculations, we were supposed to be swallowed. That was actually a projection of the best military and best and political analysts ahead of the invasion. I like to remind everyone that we were given between 7 to 10 days before everything would be done, and partners would come to our funeral with solemn speeches about the importance of respecting international law and rules-based order. So here we go. The third argument is the most important one, where he starts lambasting the United States. But on the surface, you could say, okay, Kuleba, you got a point. You've got a point that Ukraine was essentially supposed to fall very quickly. But what happened was that NATO came in with all of its arms, weapons, support. And that's why Ukraine was propped up. It became an attritional conflict because it wasn't just Ukraine versus Russia anymore. It was Russia versus NATO. And Russia changed its strategy, knowing that a confrontation with NATO would be catastrophic, and that with all the sanctions that began to be leveled upon it, Russia had to reorient itself and focus on other matters. So the war and conflict became attritional. Doesn't mean that Ukraine was so resilient. Look, Scott Ritter comes on my program all the time, talks about Ukrainians fighting with just absolute passion, with commitment, and none of that I'm going to put into question. Indeed, if hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have put their lives on the line, even for an absolutely just reactionary, despicable cause, put your lives on the line, really to give up your own sovereignty, to give up your own dignity for the sake of fighting NATO's war on Russia, whether they know it or not. I'm not going to question the commitment to that. I will question the just as Russia does and so much of the world does, why you would do such a thing. But nonetheless, the point is that Russia is actually winning the conflict, and attritional warfare is just different. And it was never the case that Russia was just going to collapse just because it had chosen many different means for fighting this conflict, given changing circumstances. After that period that Mr. Kuleba is trying to emphasize as a reason why Ukraine is on the should be on that it should be more optimistically seen. Ukraine should be in its current status. This has been the spin, right? That Ukraine has been able to hold its own. It's this little engine that could, but in reality, all it is a pawn of NATO, and whatever strategy Russia has changed, whatever reforms it has made with the understanding that it's NATO that it is concerned about, not Ukraine. So here's a third argument. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, says Kuleba, you have to remember one thing: security and prosperity of America stems from the current world order. If that world order ceases to exist, security and prosperity of American taxpayers will be under attack. If you cannot satisfy military means, you cannot produce enough interceptors to help Ukraine win the war against a country that wants to destroy the world order, then how are you going to win the war against perhaps an enemy stronger than Russia? Think 2 steps ahead. People come up with some credible arguments to explain why Ukraine does not deserve to be supported. But the very fact is, if you lose Ukraine, it'll have a domino effect everywhere. This is why I mentioned the difference in the defense industrial base between Russia and all our Western allies together. In 2 years of the war, Russia has become more efficient in producing weapons than the whole Western alliance. It's a bad sign. Things need to change if we are serious about defending the world as we know it. Essentially, what Kuleba is saying here is that the United States needs to step up its defense production. It needs to do what it cannot do. It needs to do what it won't do. And not only to save Ukraine, but to save the world, to preserve hegemony. Because that's what, imagine this little pawn of a puppet state lecturing the hegemon about what will be best, not just for U.S. hegemony, but for the people of the United States, the people of the United States, which have seen no benefits from this disastrous NATO-driven conflict. There have been no economic benefits to this. There have no jobs benefits to this. This has been an outright siphoning of public coffers to a war effort that is all about increasing the dangers of a major confrontation between U.S., NATO, and Russia. And it is about preserving hegemony, which is not enjoyed by the fruits of that are not enjoyed by all people of the United States. They're enjoyed by a very tiny few. So it's absolutely astounding that Kuleba can make that kind of lecture. But the point is for Kuleba is to push through Foreign Policy magazine, increase defense spending, military spending by the United States for the purpose of increasing production, with the admission that Russia's military industrial complex, its ability to produce weapons, its ability to then not only produce these weapons, but to deploy them, to have them come into operational use, is by far faster, better, and more effective than what Ukraine is doing. NATO is having their weapons be put on display. Russia is having their weapons used on the battlefield in order to make progress on the front lines. Kuleba knows this, and that's why he is begging, berating really the United States to come to its senses, preserve your world order, and be sure to spend all that you have. It'll benefit your people, he says. The Foreign Policy magazine, which, mind you, nobody reads Foreign Policy magazine in the United States. We have to be quite honest about that. Absolutely nobody reads Foreign Policy magazine in the United States except for a very, very, very small section of the population. Nobody is going to be reading this who is actually affected by the tens of billions, if not over 100 billion now, that the United States, yes, it's over 100 billion now, that the United States has spent on Ukraine aid since 2022. Really, what people are looking at in the United States is, how is this war serving them? And they're saying it's not. And that's why public opinion has shifted quite dramatically. It's why the Republicans in an election year want to use this for political brownie points. It's the Republicans aren't for peace. Don't worry. The Republicans don't care about peace. Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't care about peace. She's perfectly fine with U.S. aid to Israel to commit genocide in Gaza, to create a West Asia powder keg, because that is not as politically important as being able to exploit the Ukraine issue for political gain. The Republicans are not going to do that with Gaza because of the Israel lobby. There's no Ukraine lobby, right? So the Republican Party doesn't really have much to worry about there. The permanent deep state, military state, they'll just continue what they always do, and they'll ignore what the Republicans have to say. The Israel lobby, though, that's a whole nother story. If you question the Israeli apartheid, genocide, if you question the Zionist entity and its influence over Washington, you could very well lose your job. Ask Cynthia McKinney about what it means to be ousted from political office because of opposition to Israeli war crimes. She was ousted from the Congress because of that. In any event, the point to be made, the point that should stick, is that Ukraine is in a really desperate situation at this moment. At any point during the summer of 2024, we could see many dominoes continue to fall on the front line, and Russia not only have the initiative and seize the initiative, but Russia be in the driver's seat toward an ultimate end goal, an ultimate ending of this conflict. Didn't think we would get here. Attrition is slow. Predictions are tough to make, but everything points to Ukraine, regardless of what the $61 billion, only a fraction of that going to military assistance, will do. All signs point to it's not going to, not only is not going to change things, but Russia still has a lot left up its sleeve. And Russia, in this exhibition in Moscow of NATO military equipment, said, the BBC journalist, Mr. Rosenberg, had this: victory will be ours. That is Russia's ultimate objective. That is ultimately what is to come. It's only a matter of time from here. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.